Okay. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the nervous system. So we'll just do a brief intro here, kind of on general ideas around the nervous system and what nerves are. And so, yeah, go ahead and think through this with your team and answer the question when you're ready.
There's a lot of. Bring it into the brain.
They are new. Thank you. I just got them yesterday. Thank you. Yeah, first time wearing them. They're very comfy. Yeah. Yeah. I have a green pair like this too, but they got too old. So yeah, thank you. All right. Go ahead and send that in if you have it. All right. Anybody else? I only see 30. So hit that button a couple more times. Hit the send button just to make sure. There we go. Okay, good. That looks like most of you. So most of you are saying C is the answer, and that's correct. So this is kind of a good way to think about the nervous system, is that these are the three primary things that the nervous system does. Is it receives sensory information, brings that into the central nervous system, does some sort of integration, has some processing with other parts of the nervous system, and then decides on some motor outputs to send out, and then contracts muscle to carry out those motor outputs, right? So these are kind of in a nutshell, what the nervous system does, right, is sensory information, motor output, and then a lot of integration, right? Most of it's integration because that's most of what happens in the brain is neurons talking to neurons and all of that. So questions on that at all? Okay, so kind of overview of some terminology and just parts of the nervous system that we'll talk about. So afferent versus efferent, right? So afferent is going to be the same as sensory, right? Efferent is the same as motor. And what these things mean are, this is going to be going from the outside to the inside. Okay, or we could say from the periphery to the central nervous system, so CNS. Okay, and then motor is going to be the opposite, right? From CNS to the periphery. All right, so from the inside to the outside. All right, so this is really just about, we can define sensory neurons and motor neurons based on the direction that the signal goes. That's it. Right? On sensory motor or sensory neurons, it's always going to come from the outside in, right? And motor neurons, it's always going to come from the central nervous system and go out some direction, some way. Okay. So then the central nervous system includes obviously the brain, okay, but also the spinal cord. Okay. So those are the two things there in the central nervous system. And there's all kinds of structures that protect our central nervous system, right? So we have our skull for the brain. We have cerebral spinal fluid, which we'll talk about, which kind of surrounds the brain, kind of makes the brain so it's like floating in fluid, which helps protect it. And then we have our vertebrae that protect our spinal cord, right? Our spinal cord goes through all those vertebral foramen, right? So it's surrounded by bone. There's also a fat pad around it. So it's mostly bone, some fat, some fluid, different things that all protect our central nervous system. Okay, peripheral nervous system is going to include cranial nerves. Okay, so these are nerves that come directly out of the brain and serve specific functions. There's 12 of them. One of the last classes of the semester will go through the cranial nerves. You'll learn all of the names, all their functions, where they're at, what they do. And then we have spinal nerves. So these are nerves coming out of the spine instead of the brain, which is where most of our nerves come from, right? And that's what we'll be kind of talking about a bit today. And so nerves are included in the peripheral nervous system, right? Whereas in the central nervous system, it's more neurons, not necessarily built up into nerves yet, the nerve part, which is more on, on the periphery only. Okay, and so there's some protection of the peripheral nervous system, but not much, right? Certain places where nerves will travel through little bony canals or kind of underneath tendons and things like that to kind of protect them. But for the most part, it's unprotected, right? Our peripheral nervous system is kind of just out there on the periphery of our bodies. Yeah, Nico.
Is it the central nervous system can't feel pain, but the PNS? That some.
Yeah, it depends on how you define the word feel, right? Because the pain is detected by our by sensory receptors in our peripheral nervous system. But that just creates an electrical signal that goes to the brain, right? And then the brain decides how to interpret that, right? So there's like the sensation part, but then there's the interpretation part, right? And so the brain interprets whether that's a painful stimuli or not, right? And so it's kind of both. But yeah.
What protects the brain again?
So the skull and the vertebrae. Not the brain, but that's the central nervous system is skull and vertebrae. The skull is for the brain, yeah, and then spinal cord would be the vertebrae. Yeah, Sydney? Yeah, cerebral spinal fluid would be included there too. Yeah, and we'll get to all those things. That's why I didn't go through like writing them all down. We'll talk about all those things as we go on. But yeah, good. Other questions on that? Okay, so talk about each of these a little bit more. Okay, so we've got our afferent versus our efferent, sensory versus motor. Okay, both of these are divisions of the PNS, right? Which sometimes can be confusing. In this case, we're using this for peripheral. Okay, we'll see in a second. There's another PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. But in this case, we're talking about PNS being the peripheral nervous system. Okay. And so the afferent side is there for to deliver stimuli from organs back to the central nervous system. Okay. So if we've got some sensory receptors in our skin here, right? Maybe some touch receptors, some temperature receptors. Those things are being stimulated by temperature, by touch, right? That starts a signal on this axon, right? That goes back here into the spinal cord. That's the function of the afferent nervous system, right? Is to get that signal from the periphery to the central nervous system. Okay. And then on the efferent side, it's the opposite, right? So the stimulus is starting up in the central nervous system, and we're sending it out to organs on the periphery, right? So we can see the body of the neuron right there, right? That's cell body, okay, in the spinal cord. The signal is going to start there and then send itself out to something like muscle or a gland. Could be skeletal muscle, could be smooth muscle, could be cardiac muscle, could be a gland of some sort, something we want to activate to do something, contract or to release something like that, right? So those motor neurons are sending those signals out that way. You'll notice with the afferent neurons, the cell body is kind of in this weird spot in the middle here, right? So we got the cell body here for afferent neurons. Cell body is in the spinal cord for efferent neurons. This is actually kind of the spot just adjacent to the spinal cord called the ganglion, and we'll see some more images of that in a second. But sensory neurons are weird because they have axons that go both directions, right? We got a body in the middle, right? That cell body in the middle, and then axons going both ways. Some going all the way out to the periphery, the other side going back to the spinal cord. Whereas motor neurons just got the body on one side, and then that one axon that goes all the way out to whatever target tissue it's heading towards. Okay. Yeah, so then we got a couple other divisions, right? So now we have two other divisions of the efferent side. Okay, so when we're breaking down the efferent side more, we have the somatic and the autonomic. Okay, so somatic, this is the one that stimulates skeletal muscle. Okay, and this is controlled voluntarily, right? Which means you can think about it and you can contract your skeletal muscle, right? Consciously control your skeletal muscle. This is the somatic side. Somatic goes with skeletal muscle. Okay. Autonomic, just like it sounds, is automatic, right? It's involuntary. We can't control it. This stimulates our cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, right? We can't think about contracting our heart and do it, right? We can't think about contracting our digestive tract and doing it and do it, right? It does it all automatically, right? Same with our glands, right? We can't force our salivary glands to contract or to release things, can't force our endocrine glands to do things. It's all automatic, right? And so the control there is involuntary. Okay, so these are both divisions of the efferent side, somatic versus autonomic. Okay, and then underneath autonomic, we have two more divisions under that. Right, so the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system are the sympathetic, which we a lot of times will abbreviate SNS, right? Sympathetic nervous system. This is our fight or flight response, right? The body is under threat for some reason, right? And so you got two options when you're under threat. You're not going to get to, if you can't get out of there in time, then you got to turn and fight, right? If you can get out of there, then you better run, right? And so those are your two options. That's why it's fight or flight, right? You're either getting out of the way of the threat or you're standing up against it and you're going to fight against it, right? So that's what our sympathetic nervous system prepares our body to do, right? And then parasympathetic is kind of just generally known as like housekeeping functions, just things that your body has to do all the time, just as general functions to keep you going. And so that one can also be abbreviated as PNS, but make sure you know whether we're talking about parasympathetic or peripheral nervous system when you see PNS. Okay, so this is just kind of a diagram, flow chart of that hierarchy we just did. So go ahead and fill this in with all the different things we just talked about. And why don't you send in the one that would be our fight or flight response? That's the one you can send in on your clickers.
Is this one involuntary?
Mhm.
And then this was.
That would be housekeeping functions is what it said there, yeah. Mhm. All right, so you're sending in that letter. Make sure to use the send button when you do that with this type of question. All right, almost everybody looks like. Go ahead and just hit send one more time. Looks like almost all of you, about 80% of you are saying G for that. Okay, so mobilizes body systems during activity. Yeah, so let's walk through each of these together. So we're going to start out with the central nervous system up top, right? That's the brain and the spinal cord. And then we go over to the peripheral nervous system, right? And the peripheral nervous system has all kinds of branches. Okay, so C there is going to be the sensory side of that, the afferent side. Okay, and then we go over to the efferent or the motor side, right? And then that efferent has two divisions, right? Has the somatic and the autonomic, right? So somatic is controlling skeletal muscle, right? And then autonomic is the automatic side controlling really three primary tissues, right? Which are cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Okay. And then underneath the autonomic, we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So sympathetic would be the one mobilizing the body for activity. That's the fight or flight response, right? And then parasympathetic would be housekeeping functions, conserving energy, those things. Okay, so this is kind of just the whole hierarchy of our nervous system. Questions on that at all? Give you another sec to finish writing it down. Okay, so that next slide says, what is a nerve? Okay, well, let's talk about that. But before we do, I want you to feel one of the nerves in your body first. Okay, so hold your elbow up like this. Okay, on the medial side, you got this bone that sticks out medially from your humerus. What's that called? Medial what? Epicondyle, perfect. Okay, or medial epicondyle. Okay, so feel your medial epicondyle, find that, and then kind of go just lateral to that. It'll kind of fall into like a little soft kind of canyon there. Okay, and then go just a little bit proximal from that, and then kind of like dig your finger in there and start plucking around a little bit like a guitar string, kind of. And you might need to just kind of adjust the way you're holding it. You probably find a little sensitive spot, right? Does anybody feel anything shoot into their pinky and their ring finger? Yeah, yeah. That's your ulnar nerve, right? So you're getting some, you're kind of activating your ulnar nerve, sending some signals down. Your ulnar nerve kind of innervates this whole thing here. Okay. All right. So what actually like anatomically or physically are you feeling? Go ahead, talk about that with your team for a second. What's in there? What is that thing you're feeling?
Yeah.
Did you find it? You get it in there? Did you find yours? Nice. Yeah. Kind of sensitive. Yeah, a little staticky. Yeah, for sure. A little tingly kind of. Aiden, can't get over this cold, huh? Yeah. 2 weeks? Are you serious? You go to the wellness center yet?
It's just congestion, like that's.
Oh,
like
you're
the
not
rest of,
tired or
like, I-
any pain, or it's not like a sinus infection.
Just
Okay.
like-
They just keep coming, I think is the problem. Like you get over one, then you get the next one. Yeah. No fun. All right. Let's hear what you guys think. What's in there? What's the structure you might find in there? Somebody tell me. Nothing? What do we got, Nico? What's one thing in there? Okay, there's some myelin sheath for sure. That'd be kind of be represented by this little white spot there. What else? Yeah, Sydney? Axon terminals. Maybe not terminals, because we're not really necessarily connecting to anything right there. But by the time we get to the end of the nerve, we would have some axon terminals. Yeah. Okay. Which implies there's axons in there, right? That's the primary thing that's in there is axons. Okay. So we've got these are all axons, right? All of the bodies of these neurons, so neurons are the cells of the nervous system, right? We'll talk about other cells too, but neurons are the primary cells. So the body is up in the spinal cord of the brain, right? And then the axon comes down. Sorry. Um, and so a nerve is just full of a bunch of axons. That's really what it is, right? We'll look at some of the there's other connective tissue structures that kind of hold it all together. And there's fascicles, just like there was in muscles. But the big thing is that it's mostly axons, right? That's what we're feeling. So we're not really feeling this part, the body part, right? That's going to be in the central nervous system, but in the periphery, it's going to be just a big bundle of axons. That's what it is. So a couple fun facts about nerves. We have some really long nerves, right? One of our longest nerves, the longest nerve in the body is the sciatic nerve. Some of its axons can be 3 to 5 feet long, right? So, and again, those are single cells that are that long, right? A single cell. It's microscopic in its diameter, right? But it's really long in its length, right? And some sensory neurons are even longer because the axon, again, we saw that cell body in the middle, right? And one axon went to one side, then the other one actually goes all the way up the spinal cord, up to the brain, right? So you have all the way from the brain down to wherever that is, your pinky toe or whatever it is, where that sensory receptor is on the end. So you've got neurons that span your whole height, right? The whole height of your body, pretty much, not to the top of your brain, but they get to the bottom of your brain. And so then when I was thinking about this a while ago, I thought, what about in something like a blue whale? It's like 75 feet long, right? That means there's actually axons in a blue whale that are 75 feet long, right? To think about a single cell that's that long, right? And then I started thinking like, wait, that means like, how long does it take for the signal to get from its tail to its head, right? So if you're like scuba diving behind a blue whale and you go and you just tap it on the tail, which would be amazing if you're ever back there and got to do that. It would take about 6 seconds for the signal to get to the brain of the whale because that's about how fast it travels. Only about a half a meter per second on the little sensory neurons like that. So it's like a 6 second delay when something touches its tail. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, something touched me, right? Like, it's amazing, right? Yeah. So that'll for sure be on the test. So make sure. I'm just kidding. Just fun facts. Fun facts don't have to be on the test, and they wouldn't be fun, right? But all right. Okay. Well, let's talk about how we classify nerves. Okay, we can classify nerves a few different ways. One of those ways is how do they interact with our central nervous system? And so that's where we got the terminology of spinal nerve versus cranial nerve. Okay, so if it comes out of our brain, it's a cranial nerve. If it comes out of our spine, it's a spinal nerve. Okay, we can also classify them based on the type of neuron it is, right? We've already been talking about these. So some nerves are purely afferent, right? So there's only sensory neurons in that nerve. Okay, there's some that are purely efferent, only motor nerves. Okay, only motor neurons. But then most of our nerves contain a mix of sensory and motor. Okay, so that ulnar nerve we were feeling, it's got a bunch of sensory, a bunch of motor for sure. But then some of our cranial nerves will be purely one or the other. Some of our cranial nerves only interact with one single muscle, like an eye muscle. That's all they do. So, but most of them are going to be a mix. And then other nerves are categorized by what region of the body they interact with. So this could be underneath the afferent side, this could be somatic afferent nerves. Okay, so these are dealing with our body surface, our muscles, our joints, but then we have visceral nerves as well. And those are going to like our internal organs in our abdomen and our thoracic cavity. Those would be the visceral ones. Somatic will be more on the body surface, right? And then underneath efferent, got the same idea. Somatic ones would be mostly with skeletal muscle control, and then autonomic would be the things that are involuntarily controlled. So just different ways that we kind of classify and categorize nerves. Okay, so we had a similar slide to this when we talked about muscle and muscle hierarchy. But we have a similar thing with nerves. So when we talk about a nerve, like the one we were just messing with, our ulnar nerve, that would be like the nerve. It has a name, right? The ulnar nerve, the sciatic nerve, something like that. This is a big collection of fascicles, just like we had in muscle. Okay, and the nerve itself is covered with epineurium. Okay, so that's the most external connective tissue membrane that kind of protects the nerve. Okay, but then each nerve is made up of, each nerve fascicle is a bunch of axons together, right? And that fascicle is covered by perineurium. Okay, so another connective tissue membrane similar to the one we talked about with muscle. Okay, and then we have blood vessels kind of housed in that perineurium. Okay, and then each of those axons from a single neuron is going to be covered by myelin, maybe. Not all neurons are myelinated. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Okay, but the myelin sheath and the axon both are covered by the last membrane, which is the endoneurium. Okay, so we got the nerve itself covered by epineurium, which is made up of a bunch of fascicles, which each of those fascicles are covered by perineurium. And then the fascicles are made up of a bunch of axons, those axons are covered by endoneurium, and then some of those axons are also covered by myelin, but not all of them. Okay. So take a second, label those structures here, and you can take a guess on what you think here. Go ahead.
See, I was like, I don't know. Okay, wait, I also that one. I feel like it's not, but easy. I mean, that's the way. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, I read it. I figured. It's so, you know, muscle memory, so it's like. Like if you put. Oh, yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
What do you think's the toughest?
Wouldn't that be one?
All right, go ahead and send in your answer to that one. Which membrane is the toughest? It's going to be a number, right? Okay. Sometimes just take the batteries out, twist them around a little bit. Sometimes that works. All right, so put that number in, hit the send button. If you guys are bored later, Google fun facts about blue whales. It's pretty amazing, some of the stuff. The heart of a blue whale would take up about half of this classroom, like a single heart. You can easily stand inside. Like I could easily stand inside one of the chambers, like the left ventricle of a blue whale. It's crazy, right? Yeah, it's insane. Their vocal abilities are so loud that it would blow your eardrums out if it made a sound right next to you. So, all kinds of fun stuff. All right. All right. More people hit send. All right. So most of you are saying one there as the toughest membrane. It's always going to be the one that is on the outside, right? The most external one is going to be the thickest and the toughest. So that's the epineurium, right? Next one that covers the fascicles is the perineurium, and then the one that covers the axons is the endoneurium. Okay, and then we just kind of go down from there on the structures. So A is the nerve itself, right? And the idea of like gross nerve is that it's like gross anatomy, things you can see with your eye, right? You can actually see the nerves in the body, right? So that's why it's called gross, not because it smells bad or something. Um, and then we got fascicles, right, in B. And then C would be those neurons, okay? And those axons of neurons. And you can see some of them are myelinated, some of them are not myelinated, okay? We'll talk about those differences later on. But we got blood vessels, both arteries and veins in our nerves as well to supply oxygen and nutrients to all the cells in there, all the tissues. So, questions on any of that? Okay. You guys are supposed to write that down while you're working on it. You got to make a decision that then your brain remembers it better versus like waiting just to copy it down when you see it. It's true. Okay, we're moving on. All right, so let's talk about spinal nerves specifically. Okay, so when the nerves that come out of the spinal cord are called spinal nerves. Okay, so this is the spinal cord right here, right? And we have two different roots that come out of the spinal cord. Okay, so the dorsal root back here, dorsal is the posterior side. You can remember that by thinking of a dolphin and its dorsal fin, right? And so that's the posterior side. It's on its back, right? And then ventral or the anterior side. And so the thing to notice here is that the roots are not mixed with afferent and efferent neurons, okay? We only have afferent neurons coming out of the dorsal side. Okay, so that's key. All of our afferent neurons come out of the back of our spinal cord. Okay, and then all of our efferent neurons come out of the front or the anterior side of our spinal cord. Okay, so those roots are not mixed. Okay, ventral is always efferent, dorsal is always afferent. Okay, and then we have this little structure called the dorsal root ganglion. This is where all the cell bodies of those sensory neurons are, right? Remember the sensory neurons have the cell body in the middle, like this. Right, then we have an axon going out to the receptors, another axon going into the spinal cord, and then most likely up to the medulla. Talk about that part of the brain later. And then we have the dorsal, and then we have two rami. Okay, so the dorsal ramus is the one that's going to feed the posterior side of the body. All right, but this is now mixed. So you can see some of the efferent neurons from the ventral side had to cross over here to get back to this dorsal ramus, right? And then we see some of the afferent neurons that came from the dorsal side had to cross over to get into this ventral ramus in the front, right? So there's just kind of like crossing thing that happens there so that both of these rami have a combination of motor and sensory neurons. Okay? Questions on that so far? Okay, well then let's label it. Okay, go ahead and label that. This is a fun little thing that helps you remember that. Sad Dave. Okay, it's kind of what the spinal cord looks like. It kind of looks a lot like Betsy, actually. Betsy has resting sad face. And it kind of looks like her little face with her little ears sticking up. But Sad Dave, so sensory is afferent, which is dorsal. Okay, that's the sad part. And then dorsal is always afferent, ventral is always efferent. That's just one way to help you remember that. But yeah, go ahead and label these things, and we'll come back together in a sec.
Yeah, right?
On your clickers, you can send in the one that would have sensory neurons only. Okay, go ahead. Speaking of Betsy, I don't think I can bring Betsy on Friday. I have way too many things going on. I'm all over campus. She'd be stuck in my office all day, which she doesn't like. So sorry, but I'll try to bring her next time. I know. Yeah, we need to reschedule. Bessie's schedule doesn't align with your guys' schedule. I'm sorry.
Walker, we could watch it.
Sure, you want to come to my office and take her for a pee? You could. All right, we could work something out. She's pretty famous. Students say hi to her all the time, and I have no idea who the students are. They're like, hey, it's Betsy. I'm like, oh, yeah. All right, so send in the one that would contain sensory neurons only. Check with the people on your team on your answer. Make sure you're on the same page there. All right. A couple more people need to send it in, but I'll leave it open for a sec. So most of you, only about 2/3 of you are saying B is the answer there. But let's walk through each of these. So A is pointing to this one here. Is that dorsal or ventral? Ventral. How do you know? How do you know it's on the anterior side? Actually, huh? Because it says anterior view. Yeah. Okay. What if it didn't say that? Could you figure it out? The vertebral body is what you're looking at, right? You know that's on the anterior side because sometimes this will be flipped, like the next slide has it flipped the other way. But yeah, so that you can use the body to kind of tell. Okay, so we've got the ventral root, right? B would be the dorsal root. Okay, so most of you said that B was the answer to this question here, which is right. Right, so dorsal equals afferent. Okay, and then we have, what's C? What do you guys think C was? A little ganglion. Yeah, this is the collection of all the cell bodies of those sensory neurons, right? Dorsal root ganglion. And then we've got the two rami. So the dorsal ramus, so that's feeding the posterior part of the body, and then the ventral ramus going to the anterior side of the body. Okay. All right. Questions on that at all? All right. So this next slide just kind of helps us to remember this, kind of process this information. So this has a bunch of questions on it, okay? But I think if you kind of work through them individually, it helps you remember this and know this, okay? So these are the coloring of the neurons there is helpful, okay? And so again, you can tell what side you're on by these labels, but also by the cell body or the spinous process here, right? But then we can see each of these questions. So what I want you to do for just a couple minutes is work through these questions with the people on your team. Okay, so all of the ones on the left side here are talking about where these structures originate from, meaning that the signal is coming from the inside going out. Okay, and then over here is talking about where these structures like initially enter the diagram. Okay, meaning that the signal is going from the outside coming in. Okay, so go ahead and just kind of work through a few of these questions. You're really just putting a letter at the bottom for each of these. Okay, and then I'll put a circle around one in a second for the one I want you to send in on your clickers, but go ahead and start working on each of these questions with your team.
Oh, yeah.
It originates.
Yes, I would agree. What would be like?
So write those answers and make the decision.
These, are they not the same? No?
What's that?
Well, I'm,
Some of them are the same, for sure.
okay, but not all of them.
Hmm.
So they might possibly not.
There's only 4 options. There's 8 questions, so.
Oh, because this goes like that one goes down, but that's still A, right? Peculiar. Guess I'll find out.
Yeah, you'll find out.
Wait, I have a question. You can go. Oh, sorry. No, you're good. Go. So would like the spinal cord ones be like involuntary specifically, or
What do you mean the spinal cord ones?
the spinal cord nerves? Like, would they?
The spinal nerves. So we have both voluntary and
And-
involuntary coming from there.
Okay.
So a nerve can contain both. Yeah. Can contain both somatic neurons, afferent neurons, can contain autonomic neurons. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the sensor signal only goes through to D because on the anterior side, it's on the.
You're almost there.
On the anterior side, it's only sensory. Or the
Anterior side is only motor.
only mode.
Yeah. Posterior side is only sensory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the sensory signal can
Only go to D. Yeah. It's gonna come in both A and B, but they're eventually gonna get over to D. Both of them gotta get to D somehow. So that means the ones coming in A
Right,
had to cross over here to get over to D, right?
right. So it can come in on air, but then on the anterior side, but then on the anterior side, ending point is.
Yep, exactly. So that one that I circled there, go ahead and send that in on your clickers. All right, send in the answer there to that one. I'll leave it open, but we can start talking through these questions. So, all right, so let's start with the first one. So from which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the anterior side of the body originate from? Where do all motor neurons originate from? Which letter? Which one? C, yeah, right. So because that is the ventral side, right? So all motor neurons originate from C. Okay, so then which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the posterior side of the body originate from? Motor neurons that innervate the posterior side of the body, where do they originate from? C, they're all from C, right? We just said all motor neurons originated from C. They've all got to come from that same spot right here. Okay. All right, so then from which structure do the motor neurons that innervate the anterior side of the body exit the region in this diagram? What'd you guys say there? A, yeah? And what's that called? What's A called? The ventral what? Ramus, yeah, ventral ramus, okay? Whereas this was the ventral root right there, right? But then we get to the ramus over there in A, okay? And then lastly, which structure do they exit to go to the posterior side of the body? Which one do we say there? B, this one here, right? Yeah. So B, okay? So that's the dorsal ramus for that one. Okay, now let's go to the sensory side. So which structure do the sensory neurons that come from the anterior side of the body initially enter this diagram? So anterior side of the body, they're coming in. Which letter did you put there? A, yeah, absolutely. Okay, because that's coming, so that would be the ventral ramus, again, a mixed part, okay? And then which ones from the posterior side of the body, do they enter this one? What'd you guys put there? B, that's the dorsal ramus right here, okay? And now the one on the clickers, most of you guys put D for this, okay? So what's the final stopping place of the sensory neurons that are coming from the posterior side of the body? Most of you guys put D, which is correct. All sensory neurons end up at D, right? So they're all gonna go. Okay, so that's gonna be the same answer for this question as well. Okay? So if all those questions confuse you, you don't have to use this to study, but it's just might be helpful to go back to it and wrap your head around all that. Okay. All right. Questions on that? Okay. So a couple more things kind of just about the anatomy of the nervous system and how things come out of the spinal cord. So one of those things are these nerve plexes. Okay. So most of our spinal cord, where the nerves come out, they get all tangled up. And that's just part of the natural setup, except for kind of the very middle part, except for T2 to T12. Those come out nice and clean and straight. Okay. But all the other ones come out in these big tangles, right? And those tangles are called plexes. Okay. And so what that means is we have some kind of crossing over of different spinal cord levels. And what the end result of that is that something like a single muscle, right? So each muscle or each kind of region that a group of nerves is supplying is going to be innervated by multiple levels of the spinal cord. Okay, this is helpful because if we get some damage to maybe one nerve coming out of the spinal cord, that doesn't mean that there's one muscle that just doesn't work anymore, right? We have innervation from other levels of the spinal cord, other nerves that help innervate that muscle so the muscle can still work, right? Same thing if we have damage at kind of one part of the spinal cord, then we've got other levels of the spinal cord that can still help innervate that region of the body, right? So plexes are kind of serve a protective mechanism like that. Okay. How many people have heard of when somebody gets a stinger in football? Stingers, heard that term? Yeah. Anybody had a stinger in football? Yeah. It's when you get your neck kind of like pushed this way and your shoulder goes down. It's when your brachial plexus, which is this one here, right? When that gets stretched and you get some damage to these neurons, you kind of get this like big sensation of like tingly and burning going down your arm. That's just kind of a common football injury, but it can happen in other things too, for sure. So. Okay. All right. So those are plexes. Okay. Another thing to note with the way nerves come out of the spinal cord is how we name them. Okay. So on the cervical region, so up in our neck, we have nerves C1 through C8. Okay. But how many cervical vertebrae do we have? Only 7, right? So it's kind of weird, right? But then all the other levels, we have a matching of the number of vertebrae with the number of nerves, okay? So yeah, these ones all match, but this one is different because the nerve exits the spinal cord superior to the vertebrae it's named for at the cervical level, but then inferior to for the rest of them, okay? It's kind of like there's just an extra nerve right here. So that's how they did it, right? That's how they kind of named it. Okay, so there's no C8 vertebrae, right? But there's a C8 spinal nerve. Okay, yeah, so let's take a couple minutes here and just kind of recap via these questions with the things we talked about for class. Fill the stuff in. We'll come back here in a sec, make sure you got it, and we'll be done.
It's 3 slides. That one? Or so. Oh, yeah. Well, the afferent is sensory. Yeah.
Studying via osmosis, Riley. Go absorbing into your brain. Need a nap. Make sure you talk in your team about the question there, which ones cross over. Make sure you talk about that part in your team. You can just keep the box over there at your seat.
I got vegetable.
All right, let's go ahead and come back together here and finish this up. So I just wrote in my answers there. So which roots of the efferent neurons come from? Ventral, afferent, dorsal. All right, so then dorsal, ventral. So which ones cross over? Okay, so the way to think about that is the afferent neurons that end up on the ventral side had to cross over to get there, right? Because they started on the dorsal side, right? And then the efferent neurons that end up on the posterior or the dorsal side had to cross over to get there because they started on the other side, right? On the ventral side. Okay, in our ganglions, in these dorsal root ganglions, we have cell bodies of sensory neurons, right? And then the last ones there, cervical spinal nerves exit the spine superior, whereas all the other ones exit the spine inferior to the level that they're named after. Okay. Questions on any of that? Yeah, Brooke. Cell bodies of sensory neurons. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Study hard. Good luck on the quiz if you haven't taken it yet. We'll see you guys Friday for the exam.